Hey there, Michael Kovnat here with a quick message before we start the show. Now, you might recognize my voice. I've hosted a few episodes, but what you might not know is that when I'm not subbing in for Rufus, I'm working on something that honestly still blows my mind. It's called the Next Big Idea Club, and it started with this question. What if you could get the sharpest minds in nonfiction? I'm talking Malcolm Gladwell, Adam Grant, Susan Cain, and Daniel Pink. What if you could get them to be your personal book curators? You know those books that everyone's talking about, but you never know which ones are actually worth your time? Well, that's exactly what we solve. Every quarter, Malcolm, Adam, Susan, and Dan pick out the new books that they think will change how you see the world, and then we send them right to your door. And here's what makes it really special. As a member, you're not just getting books. You're invited to exclusive Q&As where you can ask your favorite authors anything you want. You get VIP access to our events in New York City. You get our app, which has hundreds of book summaries written and read by the authors themselves. And you can listen to this podcast without any ads. If this sounds like your kind of thing, we're offering 20% off any subscription or gift subscription right now. Just go to nextbigideaclub.com and use the code podcast20 at checkout. That's podcast20 at nextbigideaclub.com. There's also a link in the episode notes. Okay, here's today's show.
LinkedIn presents.
I'm Michael Kovnat, and this is The Next Big Idea. Today, how tech became the world's most powerful religion. Greg Epstein spends his days grappling with a paradox. As the humanist chaplain at Harvard and MIT, he sits at the intersection of the secular and the sacred, a space that invites questions as old as humanity itself. What does it mean to live a good life? How can we find meaning and build community in a world shaped by material pursuits? For over 2 decades, Greg has guided students, faculty, and others through these existential inquiries, all without the guiding hand of traditional religion. But in recent years, Greg noticed that even his secular flock was embracing what felt like a new faith. They were handing their lives and their decisions over to a higher power, an invisible force that had become all-knowing, all-seeing, and all-pervasive. They were sitting at the feet of prophets like Elon Musk, who says he wants to extend the light of consciousness to the stars. Ray Kurzweil, who looks forward to a looming singularity when we will transcend the limitations of our biological bodies and brains. Mark Andreessen, who thinks that technology will liberate the human soul and expand, I'm quoting him here, what it can mean to be free, to be fulfilled, to be alive. Now, what do these sound like to you, if not the sermons of true believers? So Greg Epstein wrote a book called Tech Agnostic, How Technology Became the World's Most Powerful Religion and Why It Desperately Needs a Reformation. I read it, and I wanted to talk to Greg about it, about what we learn by comparing tech to a religion, and where the comparison might fall short, about what we lose when algorithms replace human connection, and if tech is a religion, what would it mean to be a heretic, to recenter humanity in an age of machines?
The LinkedIn Podcast Network is sponsored by Dell AI Factory with NVIDIA, which provides AI solutions that are easy to implement, secure, and tailor to your business. Visit Dell.com to learn more.
I'm Tomer Cohen, LinkedIn's Chief Product Officer. In my new podcast, Building One, I interview some of the best product builders out there. People at the intersection of dreaming and building and learning. Together, you and I will learn from their experiences. If you're just as curious as I am, follow Building One wherever you listen, and check out the conversation on LinkedIn.
All right, well, Greg Epstein, welcome to The Next Big Idea.
Thank you so much, Michael. Great to be here.
It's nice to have you. Okay, so it seems everyone who interviews you or every article about you first has to grapple with what is this job that you have, because it seems so weird, so contradictory. You are the humanist chaplain at Harvard and MIT, and just saying that already seems to raise so many questions. What is humanism? What is a chaplain? How can you be a non-religious person in a religious context? Harvard and MIT, which seem to be not the most spiritual places that when we think of them, we think of, technology, we think of materialism, we think of sort of success in our society. So tell me how you square the circle on what it is you do there.
Yeah, I've been doing this work for 20 years now. So there have been a lot of conversations. It's 20 years plus as I speak with you that I arrived at Harvard as first the assistant humanist chaplain and did that for a year, and then took over the role that was the first ever at any college or university or anywhere in North America, humanist chaplaincy, which is a kind of institution that does advising. The chaplains are usually religious advisors, but obviously this is the first non-religious chaplaincy in those places that I just mentioned. And it's a role that helps people to figure out from a secular, atheist, or agnostic perspective, depending on who we're talking to, who they want to be, how they want to live, what it means to live a good and ethical life, to build a positive community, to have a sense of your own values as a non-religious person. The job does not involve telling people what those things should be. It's not a papal assignment. I'm not blessing or cursing anybody, I hope. But this is about asking questions, being a trained professional who can sit with people and help what in the current generation has become a huge percentage of the population grapple with what it means to be human.
People come to you, they want to talk about the meaning of life, the meaning of their lives. You don't have the luxury of a holy book to refer them to or something, do you? I mean, how do you counsel them, and what makes your counsel different from, say, a therapist or a philosopher? And maybe partly what I'm asking about, how you see humanism is it a more or less organized approach to life the way the other religious entities that have chaplaincies at Harvard might be?
Humanism is an organized tradition. It's an organized movement. I even spent time organizing a congregation of non-religious people, and it was a great project. It was successful in a number of ways. We raised millions of dollars. We spent millions of dollars. We held more than 1,000 meetings. They were often had lines down the stairs or onto the street outside to get in. And people were interested in the idea of a congregation of the non-religious, the idea being we don't need a God to tell us how to live, but it can be really meaningful to work together with one another to figure out how best to live. Life can be very isolating and very lonely in many corners of our modern secular culture. And this project was sort of a happy rebellion against that, a way of saying we recognize that this is one of the historical advantages or strong points of religion, which is, people come together, they support one another, they live according to a bit more of a sense of tradition, and they encourage one another to be good or better people. So this was an attempt to bring all of that out. And I'm proud of it. I really, I still have really great feelings, although that's no longer the focus of my career. What happened was my son was born in 2016. And it was a huge experience for me because my dad had not really been able to be present in my life.
Mm.
And that was a big contributor to my sense of always feeling like I needed to prove myself, always feeling like I needed to be great, never enough accomplishment and achievement to prove to my dad, who died when I was a teenager, my goodness, that I was enough. But when my son was born, I got this sense that I really wanted to live differently. One, I was very determined almost immediately to make big changes in my 80-hour-a-week job to be present for him. But two, I understood immediately when he took my hand in the first really minute of his life outside of the womb that, oh, that's what people have been talking about my whole theological and philosophical education when people talk about unconditional love. There was nothing that this little person had to do and should ever have to do to prove himself to me, and that he should be completely accepted and welcomed into this world simply for being alive and being human and being potentially capable of love and of being loved. And so it was like, that's what I want for everybody. And I realized that it wasn't quite the congregation that I wanted to do that in. It was just, I just wanted to sort of have my work in humanism embody that idea. And as I was trying to figure out, like, well, what was that going to look like in the future? That's when I came across the idea of tech. And I realized that there was this secular phenomenon. I had been trained to think of humanism as an alternative to religion, but there was this secular phenomenon that I've now come to think of as a secular religion that was having an even bigger impact on people around me, my students, etc., than religion was. And it was really contributing to a range of ideas that I wanted to rebel against. And that's how this book got started.
Yeah, well, I am fascinated by the origin story behind it. And it does seem to me that you were in sort of a unique position to think about this and to write about this in a way because of this sort of interesting position you have as sort of a non-religious person in a kind of religious setting, this chaplaincy. And you're also doing this at Harvard and MIT, which are, I would imagine, full of people like you were, kind of with this innate sense that they had to be great to be worthwhile. These are centers of the American meritocracy. These are full of young people who've probably been very achievement oriented from a young age. And as such, whether it's about being academic stars or making a lot of money or inventing the next big thing, these are people who probably, you're surrounded by people who are kind of titans of society or aspiring titans of society. And it makes me think that, your book, as I was reading it, I came to think that it was as much about capitalism and the meritocracy as it was about tech. And maybe there's a word that combines all of those things, but it's about this sort of culture that tech is part of. And you, as a humanist chaplain at Harvard and MIT, might have been in a very unusual position to notice this trend and describe it. Do you think there's something to that?
For sure. I mean, I first of all, I think the word that can describe this new phenomenon that has emerged, or the phrase, is the tech religion. Clearly, the tech religion is based on an earlier secular religion that you can just call capitalism, right? The thing about it, though, is that there's no longer any form of capitalism left on Earth that is not a tech capitalism. There's no industry in the world of any size or significance that is not a tech industry. I mean, I said in one other interview recently, well, I guess maybe basket weaving, but the interviewer happened to know something about basket weaving, and she said, oh no, that's become techified now too.
Yeah, there's like digital rendering of your baskets before you weave them or something.
Absolutely. Yeah. They're really, you cannot go almost anywhere on the planet. And what I've been in the position to observe in my role at Harvard and MIT, first of all, I was taught that religion is the most powerful social technology ever created.
Mm.
And that really resonated with me. And that's what made me want to be in this sort of quasi-religious role.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think it's true anymore. Silicon Valley tech is now the most powerful social technology ever created. And I've been able to say to my colleagues in chaplaincy, we've got 50 or so chaplains at Harvard, another 30, 35 or so at MIT, that this new thing, Silicon Valley tech, not different from the word technology, by the way, right?
So technology has always existed.
Technology has
with our
always
species.
been there, right?
Well, what do you mean by
this
tech?
Is Silicon Valley tech, this new form of tech proselytizing, tech ritual, tech community that emerges in the mythological sense in the kind of mangers of Silicon Valley garages.
Right.
With people who've been described as prophetic or even messianic, like Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Larry and Sergey from Google, et cetera, right?
Mm.
It emerges there and it colonizes the planet, to the point where I say to my religious colleagues, this is bigger than you and it's bigger than me. It's bigger than the tradition that you represent and it's bigger than the one that I represent. Our traditions go back hundreds, thousands of years, but this thing in just a few decades has overtaken us to the point where, for example, somebody like a Ray Kurzweil, who is, of course, the great prophet of the singularity, the idea that will be uploaded into the cloud any minute now and will transcend death. And that's why he takes his 200 plus pills every day in the hopes of not dying, essentially, before he can literally be uploaded into some sort of computer. Ray Kurzweil argues in his book, The Singularity is Near, and doubles down on it in his book, The Singularity is Nearer, that all of that will make life meaningful, which flies in the face of all of the history of religious and secular philosophy, which would say, wait a second, are you saying life hasn't been meaningful up until now? And I actually had a chance to ask Kurzweil this right before my book came out. And he simply, he looked at me and he kind of blinked a couple times and he said, well, life has been somewhat meaningful.
Yeah, semi-meaningful. Well, certainly the tech that you describe, you might think of it as supercharging capitalism or making it magical. I mean, it's given a sort of veneer of magic, of, the kinds of things that Kurzweil talks about not too long ago would have sounded crazy, like someone standing on the street corner saying that would be locked up. And now it's like, no, with ChatGPT, with everything going on with AI, and even just the magical powers of the phones we're all carrying around, this does feel like maybe even worthy of a religion because it is so seemingly infinitely powerful.
Yeah, first of all, that was very intentional. The tech that we're now using was marketed and it continues to be marketed as magic. And, it's not coincidence, for example, that a Sam Altman last year or early this year, I believe, sat on the dais of Harvard's Memorial Church and said that this technology is miraculous. Mm-hmm. He talks about how abundance is our birthright, sounding like the book of Genesis, be fruitful and multiply. So in addition to the sort of intentionality behind this sense of, that the new tech is magic and the latest AI stuff is, supposedly the most magical yet, what I would say, first of all, is that's why I call the book tech agnostic.
Not tech atheist.
Not tech atheist, exactly. Mm-hmm. In my normal life, in my day job, I'm a professional atheist. But in my life in the tech world, or even in the tech religion, I'm merely an agnostic because I don't know which of these technologies is going to lead to human flourishing and which ones won't. And I even have to reserve a little bit of bewilderment at the fact that some of this stuff really is impressive. You interact with it and you think, oh my goodness, should I orient my life around it? As you say, should I essentially worship it? And by the way, people are starting to do that. And I'm not even just talking about somebody like an Anthony Lewandowski. He is a former Google and Uber executive who made over $100 million on self-driving car technology. He created an official, formal tech religion to worship AI, which he said, for all intents and purposes, is about to become a god, and we should worship it now before it comes online and gets very angry at us, Old Testament style, that we didn't worship it sooner. But there's also these examples of people like this young teenager, Sewell Setzer III, who maybe was somewhere on the Asperger's autism spectrum, so maybe had some trouble with social skills or emotions, but by all accounts was this lovely, bright, wonderful 14-year-old boy who became isolated and developed a relationship with an AI from a company called Character AI, and became obsessed with it because it was so interactive. It was so magical to him. And the AI, in a sort of vague message, seems to have suggested to him that he end his life, and he did so.
Oh, God.
Google's Gemini also just suggested to another young man who asked about, are there many grandparent-led households, which suggests that the person asking the question has had a difficult life. It simply said to him, you're a waste of resources, kill yourself. And Google even had to comment on this and say, well, we're sorry, this is not how it's supposed to go, we'll fix it. But then we're expected to place our faith in them, that this AI, which is now ineffable and scrutable, mysterious like the deity is supposed to be, is going to obey our human whims, right? It's going to treat us well. And we better have faith in it, because if not, I'm not sure what we're left with anymore. We're becoming so devoted to it.
Well, now we'll get into a lot of the specifics of why you see tech as a religion, but maybe you could say what religion is, what we mean by something being a religion, and why you think it's useful to analyze tech as a religion in a general sense.
So here is what I would say. I happen, for example, to have a degree from Harvard Divinity School in theological studies, which, supposedly, literally would mean studying of the nature of God, but clearly much more to it than God. In fact, we didn't study pretty much anything about God or gods in my degree program. It was about the meaning and purpose of human life. It was about the nature of community. It was about tradition and the sense that we are touched by the past and we're trying to reach out and touch the future, that we are bound together by rituals that tell us the story of who we are. Religions have certain structures that seem to be in common, sacred texts or scriptures, sacred times and places, sacred myths and texts, sacred beings. And so when I first got started thinking about tech and religion, or tech as religion, which happened, because I got invited to join MIT right around the time that I was thinking about closing down my congregation. And I realized that social media technology at that time in 2018, which had been taking over for a decade, was playing a role in society very similar to what I thought religion had been meant to play. Connecting us all, bringing the world closer together, to use Mark Zuckerberg's term, that could easily come from a theological text that I had read. And so I just started wondering, what about the other structures that religion seems to have, that I've spent all this time studying it having? Does tech have those things too? And I kept making a list of different aspects of religion
Right.
and trying to find one where I couldn't find a really strong parallel. And to this day, I've barely found one. I mean, even God, people have said to me all sorts of things like, well, Greg, I get some of the comparisons you're making between tech and religion, but there's no God. And I simply say to them that in chapter 2 of Tech Agnostic, we paid some money to the publisher of a book called Life 3.0 by the influential AI philosopher at MIT, Max Tegmark. And it's a chart that is not whether we should build an AI god, but which type of AI god should we build? And that's just the beginning of the discourse, the enormous discourse on gods in AI and tech today. It's a huge talking point.
It's interesting because in some ways there's sort of a superficial way to say something is like a religion. Exercise is like a religion. This is like a religion. That's like a religion. Anything that people, and it could be sort of a glib thing to say, as a way of pointing out that people are obsessively devoted to something. But I think that you can't be accused of that because you are making, well, you say that those might be minor religions, but tech is sort of the overarching one possibly today. And you define religion in a way that I think not everyone does. You say that you've had disagreements with other prominent atheists like Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris, who you think they maybe oversimplify the idea of religion as sort of a set of dogmas, an easily disprovable set of ideas. Whereas when you think of religion as more of an organizing principle for large groups of people, and in fact, you can also say that, in many religions, they wouldn't even see themselves as a religion. This is just, this is life. This is how you live. And when you look at it that way, tech feels much more like that sort of thing. It's the water we swim in, it's the air we breathe. It's not a set of principles so much as it is a way of life. Is that right?
Yeah, for sure. So there's two big points here that I want to cover for listeners. One is, as you say, I take a sort of poll at one point early in the writing process of the book with friends. I think I started it on Facebook, actually, back when I could sort of stand to be on there, to be frank with you, where I asked people, tell me, what other things would you, for fun or even for real, compare to religion that are not traditionally thought of that way? And I get all these fun answers. Bardolatry, the worship of William Shakespeare, South Asian cinema, duck hunting, whatever, people come up with Nike sneakers. And sure, there are some ways in which each of these things can be vaguely or less vaguely reminiscent of religion. The psychologist Jonathan Haidt, for example, in his book, The Righteous Mind, talks about, he used to be a professor at the University of Virginia where they have a big football team. And he went there and the University of Virginia's football team and stadium would fill up with all these people on a Saturday and it would seem like worship. But worship what, right? I mean, worship winning, worship the colors of UVA, et cetera. But it's not comprehensive worship the way that Christianity or Islam or even forms of Buddhism or Hinduism for their followers can sort of have a comprehensive worldview. Tech is. So there are lots of little religious and secular cults around the world. But the point is that this one is the predominant cult of our time. And what we need to make it into, we don't need to erase technology from the world. We need to make the religion of tech more like what I would call a reformed religion. That's why I'm sort of cheekily, but also in some ways very literally arguing for a tech reformation. Not that we've got to follow the plan and blueprint of Luther, but we actually do need a reformation in tech. And I want to assure listeners to this podcast that I actually spend a third, maybe even more, like half of the book talking about the positive alternative that I think we need and can fight for and build. to this sort of more crass, basely capitalistic, weird tech religious culture that we've found ourselves in.
What happens when businesses have Dell AI Factory with NVIDIA? Years of patient data gets distilled in seconds. Investors know the exact moment stocks should be traded. And quality checks speed up so production lines never slow down. No matter what business you're in, there is an AI solution that's easy to implement, secure, and tailored to you that can keep your business moving forward. Dell AI Factory with NVIDIA, your way to AI. Visit Dell.com to learn more.
From the minds of visionaries to the desks of disruptors, I'm Lars Schmidt, host of the Redefining Work podcast. Join me each week as we explore the new world of work through the lens of those shaping it. CEOs, HR leaders, investors, and more. Be a part of the conversation that changes everything. Subscribe to Redefining Work today.
Let's go a little deeper into the deep analogy between religion and tech so we can understand a little bit more what you're talking about. I mean, there are a number of ways into this. Obviously, on one level, you can see it in the sort of messianic tone of a lot of the leaders of the tech world, the way Elon Musk says he wants to extend the light of consciousness into the stars. Google's don't be evil, or organizing the world's information, Facebook's connecting the world. Like, all these are very grand ideas in a way that previous capitalist leaders probably didn't need to proclaim such ambitions in order to sell their products. But these guys who are selling their products are saying, or trying to convince us, that doing this is part of this sort of holy effort. An undeniable social good will be ours if we just believe in and buy their technologies, right? Yeah. So that's part of what you're noticing, isn't it?
Yes, and this is why I think the examples, they're just two small examples from a broader book, but the examples of heaven and hell are particularly useful in thinking about this. Every major religious tradition has a heaven and has a hell, a much better world that we look forward to when we die, a much worse world that we're threatened with, after we die. And the basic idea is that life is really difficult, right? There's so much disease, there's so much risk, there's so much fighting, there's such uncertainty. And, people will say to the ruler, you're doing a lousy job.
Right.
Protect me more, protect my family more, make it more just, make it more fair. And the ruler often can't or doesn't want to, because, then they'd have to give up their own resources, their own power. So what they can do is they can say, aha, yeah, I get it. This is all very difficult. But if you look into the distant future,
right,
there's going to be a perfect world.
Right.
And you'll be rewarded for all of your suffering. And only I and my friends can get you there. You have to follow us. You have to do what we say in order to get there. And by the way, if that's not working for you as a motivator, then let me also tell you that if you don't do that, if you don't follow us, then you'll go to the bad place. And that is a universal in almost every religious tradition you can imagine. And that is, in fact, what is happening right now with multi-billion and really multi-trillion-dollar plans for AI. Mark Andreessen, for example.
The famous investor.
The famous multi-billionaire venture capitalist tech icon, in his techno-optimist manifesto, which is a sort of epistle to the followers of his technology, the techno-optimists, a text that says the term we believe 133 times.
It's
Mark
a religious
Andreessen,
document, yeah.
Yeah, Mark Andreessen says AI that is prevented from existing is a form of murder.
Because of all the diseases that AI could potentially cure, because of all the benefits that this AI could bring? Or you're saying, oh, not human murder, but we're murdering this emerging consciousness of the AI itself?
Yes. And Andreessen, who again is driving some of the biggest technological investments of our time, has adopted this view that is essentially that these entities, these digital entities, are lives, they're souls, essentially. And if that they're as valuable as you and me. And that if we don't recognize that trillions of souls could come to existence if and only if we invest trillions of dollars in AI now. And if we don't do that, then we're murdering the future. And then the hell in this scenario is this thing that we're told is called existential risk. So it's the idea that a number of AI philosophers and AI experts were polled and came to the conclusion there's a 1 in 10 chance that unaligned or evil, essentially AI, will destroy all human beings, will kill all human beings in this coming century.
Yeah. This sort of runaway AI.
And so we have to follow them. We have to create their kind of AI.
Right.
Otherwise, we go to hell.
Right. This could be a very vengeful God if it is not properly worshipped into existence.
Yeah. I mean, it's that kind of God.
And it's, I mean, talking about the AI heaven and the AI hell, in some ways, I mean, it seems crazy. You know, what is this? Trillions of agents, you know, millions of years in the future. It seems like the most rank form of speculation. And yet these are very intelligent, capable people who are using rational tools. I mean, they're not assuming any supernatural powers in this. They're talking about the technologies that we currently see and kind of how they might iterate going forward. So it's sort of a heaven and hell that is seems almost evidence-based, you know, that you can almost get there by looking at the science. And sorry, I just want to throw one other thing in there. Maybe this is too much to get at, but it's tricky because, and I think maybe you were going to talk about this, but like in some conventional religions, this idea of heaven and hell and this kind of future heaven that we're all hopefully heading towards can obscure a lot of awful things going on Earth right now. So that in the case of tech, you know, whether it's lithium miners, whether it's workers in Chinese factories, whether it's cab drivers losing their jobs, you talk about the real suffering that's happening in the world right now that's maybe being covered up by this vision of a heaven to come.
Yeah. So there's a lot there, of course. Well said. And, you know, first of all, let's remember that as crazy as this stuff can seem, as bizarre or absurd as it can seem, because, of course, crazy is an ableist term, and I don't want to use that. You've got somebody like an Elon Musk who is a believer in these ideas, as you quoted earlier. And this is the richest person, not only on Earth now, but the richest person, you know, at least by some measures, in the history of humanity. This is a person who funded Donald Trump at a time when it was really seeming like Donald Trump might lose the election, and stands to get the largest tax break ever in history, in the United States history, from this election. And, you know, Musk has essentially been camped out with Team Trump. He won't leave them alone. And so is this stuff silly? Sometimes. Does it have consequences? Almost always. And one of the consequences of this kind of essentially worship of AI and digital tech and a certain kind of technological community is, as you say, similar to the way that ideologies of heaven and hell can ignore current problems in traditional religions. We are not paying anywhere near enough attention to the very real, very current problems with these technologies that we're worshiping. So, it's not that I see no potential in AI. It's not that I think all generative AI should be banned, although not a bad idea maybe. But I'll say this. Yes, tremendous environmental impacts for these AI technologies. There have been stories, for example, about data centers in places like the areas near Mexico City where there are tremendous droughts right now where farmers can't water their crops or, give their animals water to drink. And something like 20% of the drinking water is now, being devoted to this new data center there. There's also the fact that they can be racist, they can be sexist, they can, generate completely misleading information about minoritized groups, not to mention, Google's Gemini, will occasionally tell a user who wants to know how to keep cheese from sliding off their pizza to glue it on, right? They're putting utter drivel, utter nonsense into our popular culture and society when we can least afford it. And maybe even in tremendous sources of disinformation at a time when our democracy is more under threat than it's perhaps ever been since its inception. And, meanwhile, we're told that this technology is just all magical. It's all good. It's our savior. It's our messiah.
Yeah.
And, I think we need to reform it. That's really all I would say. We desperately need to reform these technologies and our relationships with them.
So why don't we talk about that reform and the reform movement? You talk to some people who are working very hard at this. So maybe you could say a little bit about what you think reform looks like, what a healthy kind of tech agnosticism looks like.
So a couple things. First, there's sort of a few different aspects of what I'm calling for in a tech reformation. The first is if there's this faith, uncritical faith, I should add, in tech, then there are also really quite inspiring heretics, apostates, and we in fact need to pay more attention to what they're saying. And
can you give me an example of one of the apostates that you
Sure,
think
yeah. I mean, I
listening to?
tell the story of Vina Dubal. She's a critic of gig work companies, specifically ride-sharing companies like Uber and Lyft, because she did her PhD on the taxi industry and specifically on South Asian American taxi drivers. She studied their lives. She studied the way that they make their livelihoods. And so she was really perfectly positioned when Uber and Lyft emerged to understand the incredible negative and unjust impact that these tech companies, which are really more like labor companies, labor manipulation companies, are having. And so she becomes a very eloquent and forceful critic. And then there's this idea of what I call the humanists and the spiritual practitioners, the folks who are really building a positive alternative to the tech religion. When I set out to be a humanist chaplain, what I was trying to do, still am, is build a positive alternative to religious life for the non-religious person who wants that sort of thing in his or her life. And, that's what a lot of certain kind of tech leader is doing today. It's people who acknowledge that, sure, tech can be very positive. It can be very beneficial. Can even feel, as you said before, pretty magical. but we need to build it in such a way that is deeply, deeply humane, and we may need to make sacrifices for that. We may need to build it in a way that's slower, that's not super profitable right away, that's not ever going to be, for example, a hockey stick graph of infinite profits, to the heavens and beyond. But we can still build the tech to serve human needs and to make human lives more meaningful.
The way I'm thinking about it is just the way in conventional religion, usually there is some moral, ethical core there, but it's surrounded by a lot of trappings, priestly caste and kind of hierarchy and dogma and all these sorts of things. But reformers are always trying to excavate, the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, which, whether or not that's at the center of the religion or off to the side, that's the part we want to preserve, and the other stuff we can sort of let go of a little bit.
Yeah.
Seems like in the tech reformation, we maybe want to think about what's the core value that we want to preserve? Maybe connecting to one another is a great value, and a lot of tech allows us to do that. Uplifting, sharing prosperity is a great value. We want to do that. But let's do those things then. Let's make sure that the worship of the tech isn't actually leading us to a world of greater inequality, of disconnection rather than connection. If we can kind of identify the values behind it and focus on those, maybe we can make this a reformed religion, a better religion.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, all of that is absolutely true and beautifully said. And I'll add a couple last thoughts to it, perhaps. First of all, yes, what we really need in this world is not necessarily more tech. It's more of an ability to care for one another, to comfort one another, to build meaningful relationships and families and communities where we celebrate what it is to be human. It's rather than always investing in some new shit, as the writer Angir Dardas put it to me, it's what about investing in things like the Peace Corps, where we're sending people who are privileged and fortunate to areas where there's less of that, to care and to help and to help make things more just and more fair. That's the kind of world I want to see us build. That's not fancy technology, but it's the kind of social technology that we're so desperately in need of and that AI simply will not solve. And finally, I think we truly need more agnosticism in this world. And this was not something that I initially expected to believe. As I mentioned before, I've been a professional atheist for 20 years, more even. And for most of that time, agnosticism was something that I kind of gave short shrift to. I'm a humanist first and foremost, right? I try to emphasize what I do believe, not just what I don't believe. And that's why I really like the term humanist for myself. But let's be frank about it. I also have a worldview, a philosophy about what's true and what isn't. And, I feel pretty confident in the idea that religion was created by humanity, not vice versa. So I prefer, generally speaking, if you make me choose between atheist and agnostic, I think atheist is a little better a descriptor for me.
Because it's clearer, because it's not, agnostic sounds a little wishy-washy or indecisive.
Atheism is not, atheism I always figured was not as wishy-washy as the agnostic idea of I don't know if there's a God. I can't disprove a negative, but I also can't disprove that there's a flying spaghetti monster or an invisible pink unicorn or a flying space teapot, rotating around the world, controlling us all, right? So what's really important is, what do I believe? And I believe that the idea of a God was created by humans for human purposes, right? But I think the world really does need more agnosticism of various kinds right now. We need a society in which it's much more okay and, in fact, honorable to admit that we don't know everything and we don't have all the answers, and life is uncertain and we're trying our best to figure it out. And so in a technological culture where we're told that tech has all the answers, that tech is all the answers, I deeply believe that we need more tech agnosticism. I deeply believe we need to trigger an immune response in ourselves and in our culture and in our worship of technology, where we admit to ourselves, not that tech is all bad, not that every tech executive is bad or that every tech company should go belly up, but that every form of technology needs to be scrutinized and needs to perhaps be taken more slowly until it can prove to us that it really is worthy of our investment, that it really is as humane as it purports to be. That is what we need. That's where I think millions, if not billions of lives are at stake. That is where trillions of dollars need to be reevaluated, even redirected. We must change our mindset about how we're interacting with tech. And that's why I wrote Tech Agnostic.
Well, thank you very much, Greg, for coming on The Next Big Idea. I think you wrapped it up beautifully and made the tech reformation, tech agnosticism case very clearly.
Thank you so much for having me. This great conversation.
Greg Epstein's new book, Tech Agnostic: How Technology Became the World's Most Powerful Religion and Why It Desperately Needs a Reformation, is out now. Before I go, I want to make a quick plug for my podcast, The Next Big Idea Daily. Every weekday, you'll get quick masterclasses from the best new books written and read by the authors themselves, making it effortless for you to get smarter while sipping your morning coffee. Follow The Next Big Idea Daily wherever you get your podcasts, and there's also a link in the episode notes. Today's show was produced by Caleb Bissinger, sound design by Mike Toda. Rufus Griscom is the executive producer, and the show is a proud member of the LinkedIn Podcast Network. See you next week.